Welcome back, everybody, to His Heartbeat. And boy, we have a wild story today. So you got to listen to this, you guys. All right. This is Mick Weinholt. Welcome to our show.
Hey, Sue, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, I might have surprised him because you're now my second person, Mick, that has been buried in an avalanche, but a very different story. It makes me think I have to get my friend on here because that happened to her years ago. And
Yeah.
it was the beginning of a noticeable story in your life of what God was up to. So tell us a little bit, like where you're from and a little bit about family or whatever and what you're doing. Well, don't tell us what you're doing because I know what it is, and that's the end of this message. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that yet.
Yeah, let's work our way there. So,
Yeah.
born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and I was a high energy kid with what seemed like, pretty good capabilities, and I was relatively athletic and outdoorsy. And I grew up, Sue, in what most would be considering a quote unquote Christian household. And I say quote unquote because while we talked about God, while we talked about Jesus, there was a lot of chaos in my home, and the behaviors that I saw my parents exhibit didn't line up with the things that I was told about God and about Jesus, things
Mhm.
like love and those types of things. So, as an example of that chaos, I learned every four-letter word that there was
Mhm.
at the dining room table where we would have dinner every night, you know what I mean? As my parents would argue about things.
Mhm.
And so, we're probably also familiar with the phrase of rules without relationship equals rebellion. And my folks did a really solid job of trying to discipline me. I say trying because, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, despite their best efforts. But there was tons of, I would say, support for me as a person. So it wasn't as if I didn't feel as if I was loved, but I had no relationship with my folks. And I
Mhm.
want to kind of draw that distinction there. So their discipline and the rules really led me to rebellion. And
Mhm.
so I rebelled very hard against them. And by extension, very hard against God. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with God. And I perceived God to be a distant God and a disciplinarian. And so my approach, at least at the time, was I'll stay as far away from him as possible because my pride and my ego were really raging. And it was one of those scenarios where I wanted to do it my way
Mhm. Right.
without question. And if he stayed up there and I stayed down here, all would be well. So, in this highly rebellious phase, I moved from Baltimore to greater Denver because I wanted to get as far away from my folks as I reasonably could. And my brother happened to live in greater Denver. So, it was an easy landing spot. And I really enjoyed the outdoors. And so,
Yeah.
my ego is fueling me and pushing me to do really, we'll call them more aggressive than the average person in terms of the activities that I would do in the backcountry.
Yeah, I'm going
And
to add
so,
it probably wasn't
yeah,
just ego, but even pain, and wounds that you received from that environment growing up, right? That then led to that rebellion. I mean, but yeah, it can lead to I want nothing to do with an authority figure in my life, right? Because that was very negative, which would put you in a situation of I can do this without any help from anyone.
yeah, exactly where I was. I wanted to live my own life, and the expectations that my folks had were that you paid your way through college. So that was long established. You know what I mean? That it was basically once you're launched, and I was totally fine with that
Mm.
because
Yeah, you were
I
ready.
looked forward to the separation. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So you go out to Denver. Is this where the big avalanche episode occurred? How old were you? I know it was in what I had a date, 2000, right?
Yeah, exactly. So November 7th of 2000 is a day that means almost nothing to most people until I remind them that it is actually election day. It's the day of the hanging Chad. This is the George W. Bush Al Gore election of that year. And I was climbing the a 14,000 foot peak, which is right on the Continental Divide. It's pretty close to the greater Denver area. It's called Gray's Peak. And my plan, Sue, was to not hike Gray's Peak, but to actually climb it. I had
Mm.
previously hiked Gray's Peak and its neighboring peak called Torrey's Peak. And my ego here is saying, you can do this better. And so I set off to actually climb a snow slope or a snow gully called Lost Rat Couloir. So
Oh,
for those that are out there, think of basically an incredibly steep and narrow slope that you might ski down if you're an
mm.
expert skier or something like that. I
Uh-huh.
like to climb those types of things. So the reason I'm clarifying that is that this is not vertical climbing, but we are well beyond just being able to walk uphill on this type of slope.
Okay. Okay.
And so I'm approximately now 300 vertical feet up this couloir, and I've been climbing now for a number of minutes as I've ascended those a handful of a couple hundred vertical feet. And I hear this distinctive whoomph sound.
Mm.
And I knew from all of the reading that I had done, because of being an outdoor enthusiast for many years, that that meant avalanche. And so
Oh,
I immediately look up the slope and I can see the fracture line. And I can also see that the snow is coming towards me and coming towards me rapidly.
oh.
All of this is happening within seconds,
Seconds.
essentially. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my attempt then is to run perpendicular to the sliding snow. And I got one step to my left, Sue, and then I was knocked unconscious. And right before that, as I'm being swept off of my feet, I remember thinking to myself, this is going to suck for my family,
Mm.
especially my mom.
Oh,
And then the lights went out.
wow. Wow. So you were unconscious or were you dead? Or were we going to have a near-death experience uh, conversation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've actually never been asked that. So the short answer is that I regained consciousness. I was not dead
Okay.
by God's grace, although at the time I did not see it that way.
Well, yeah, it might have
So
been good to be dead, go to heaven, and come back and tell us all about it. I'm into that kind of show, so don't worry about it.
yeah, no, I would have
Okay, so
been
you were out
certainly the
cold.
experience. Yeah. And I regained consciousness at the bottom, almost back where I had started at the
Hmm.
base of this climb. And I wasn't buried by the
Wow.
snow, and I wasn't in any weird physical position, like meaning I didn't have an arm pinned behind me or underneath of me. I wasn't face down in the snow. I didn't have a leg that was mangled, like nothing. In
Uh,
fact, the position within which I was when I regained consciousness was me sitting on a rock. And so
okay.
imagine when you lay on a bed with your feet draped off of the end of the bed, right? So I'm sitting there laid backwards. And so I regain consciousness and I sit up. And my feet right at my knees, I'm bent right at my knees, and my feet are literally on the ground, and I am sitting on a flat rock. And so I sit up and shake it off like a dog almost, and then begin to take an assessment of sort of my body systems, essentially. Okay. And it seemed like everything was a go. Like I knew I was hurt in some way, and I had this sense of danger. And so that word go really became a verb for me. It became the operative word that I needed to go. I needed to get back to my pickup truck at the trailhead.
Can I ask
And
you a
so,
question? I now
absolutely,
at the moment you did not think a miracle happened. You were just surviving and figuring out what to do next. In
you got it.
retrospect, do you look back and think, was that an angel that put me on that rock? Or did, or God? Or is it possible to land like that? Because what I hear is you get buried, right? Typically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way in which you have framed that. And it has taken me roughly 25 years because that's how long ago this was. We're now sitting on 26 years, but it took about 25 years for me to realize the significance specifically of sitting on that rock
Mhm.
because I realized, again, a quarter of a century later, that I had to have been placed there. There
Yeah.
was simply no other way in which that could possibly be the case, as far as I am concerned. And while I gave God some intellectual credit early on for a miracle, it wasn't until later in life, which we'll talk about, that I really began to understand how He had saved me and delivered me in this particular avalanche.
Yeah, that's so cool. Because I do listen to these near-death experience things, and people I remember one person recently heard, and what God revealed to them was all the times that he intervened, like an angel
Mm,
wasn't blocked, a car from
yeah.
hitting them or whatever. And they were just shocked how many miracles had happened that they were completely unaware of. That's kind of what you're
Yeah.
saying. You never really thought about it till later. Okay,
Exactly.
so now what? So you're what? Tell me about the danger and the go. You think that
Yeah.
was God telling you didn't even know it, but you knew you had to get out of there?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew things were definitely bad, but didn't really have a good sense. So the route to get to the base of the climb was about 3/4 of a mile or so off trail, so through
Oh
deep
wow.
snow, and you're going up to get to the base of the climb. So I then go back through essentially my same footprints, and the travel is quite arduous until you get to the trail, and then it's a little more than 2 miles or so on the trail at that point back to the parking lot. And once I reached the trail, I was able to travel a bit more easily and begin to take more of an assessment of what was going on. I was spitting blood this whole time, so I knew something was wrong with my mouth. And then I also had blood dripping into my right eye. And anytime I would touch that, the normal thing that we're taught and that intuitively we want to do is put pressure on it and stop the bleeding, right? Well, every time I did that, Sue, it made it worse. And
Mhm.
so I had to make this very conscious decision that I have not forgotten in more than a quarter of a century to literally decide, just let it bleed. And ultimately, I then make it the roughly 3 miles. I think it's a total of 2.9 miles or so from the base of the climb back to the trailhead parking lot. And this whole time, Sue, my intention in my focus is to get to my truck, get in my truck, drive to the hospital, and essentially all would be fine, at least in my mind. Okay. Well, as I'm walking into the trailhead parking lot, I see the only other human being that's there. He's at the trailhead signs, which are right at the beginning of the trail in the parking lot. And he looks at me and I look at him and he says to me, "What happened to you?" And very matter of factly, I said to him, "I was in an avalanche." And then walked right by him on my way to my pickup truck because my focus was get in the truck and drive to the hospital.
So you
Well,
were
this
not in
guy,
shock? That wasn't a shock response, you think?
no, I was so focused. I distinctly
Wow.
remember those interactions. Yeah. Well, this guy's name is Steve, and at the time, I've never seen him before. I don't know his name. He's a complete stranger. And as I go past him and head towards my truck, which is sort of in the back of the parking lot, he pursues me and continues to ask me questions. And frankly, that was really annoying because my focus was get in the truck and drive to the hospital. Well, as it would be, I'm now next to my truck, and Steve is right there with me. And my standard procedure at the time, Sue, was to always lock my keys in my vehicle. And the reason for that was that if I ever got into some precarious situation in the backcountry and I lost my backpack, which would be where my keys would be, presumably, okay, but that I was still okay if I could make it back to my vehicle, then I could gain access to my vehicle, okay, and then sort of get out of the backcountry because I kept a key, a spare key, bolted underneath of the pickup truck bed. So no one
Okay.
would know that it was there. And so that's exactly what's happening in this situation. So I'm now at my truck and I realize that I don't have enough strength to get down on the ground, shimmy underneath of the truck, unbolt the key, shimmy back out from underneath of the truck, and stand up. And that was sort of the first instance of where I began to realize this is not good. And so I had to really humble myself. And it was that, truly that, okay?
Uh-huh.
And ask this complete stranger, can you get this key for me? And he agrees, no problem. He finds the key and then he unlocks my truck for me. And again, the goal here is get in the truck and drive to the hospital. And so this whole time, I'm focused on that. And he continues to campaign to convince me to let him take me to the hospital. And I'm no, 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 no. Well, we're now opening the vehicle. And one of the other goals of getting into my truck was to grab my warm down jacket, because at this point I'm just wearing a typical, Gore-Tex ski jacket or rain shell type of thing. And the intention was that I was just going to be moving all day. And when you're moving, you don't need a lot of warm stuff, right? So now we're back in the parking lot. This is probably, Steve and I have had some separate conversations, and we think that this is in the 4 o'clock hour, okay, on November 7th. And so the position of that peak and the subsequent ridges that connect to it, as well as where the parking lot itself is and the sun setting, we are completely in the shade and it's quite cold. And I really want that warm jacket. So I go to unzip my ski shell, okay, and I can't get the zipper down any further than right about the top of my sternum.
Mm.
Now, at the beginning of this, I'm a 19-year-old, very athletic, strong, capable person. And here we are that I can't get down on the ground and get back up. And now we're seeing that I literally can't unzip my jacket. Now, part of that was the condition that I was in. The other part of it was that all of the blood and other fluids that had been literally dripping out of me from, as I described, my forehead being split open and the blood dripping into my eye, all of that had actually frozen and coagulated on the front of the jacket. And so now again, I have to humble myself and say to this complete stranger, can you help me get my jacket off?
Doesn't this
He
guy
helped.
want to stop the bleeding? I mean, when I see someone bleeding, I remember rescuing some kid up at the high school on a weekend that was bleeding, and immediately I just turned to the stranger next and said, "Take off your shirt and give it to me. I gotta stop the
Mhm.
bleeding." But he didn't do that.
Well, no, and there's a reason for that. Okay. So I'll get to that in one tiny second here. So Steve ultimately agrees to help me take my jacket off, and he literally has to break the zipper in order to essentially free me from the jacket.
Mm.
And it's at that point that we finally get my hood off. So
Oh, he
that's
had
the
a hood
reason.
on.
So Steve sees that my
Uh,
face is completely covered in blood, but he has no idea what's happening because
why?
my hood has basically only about my nose and my eyes visible.
Okay.
So as we take the hood off, he says to me, he goes, for all intents and purposes, your right ear was sitting on your right shoulder. And he goes, and I was looking at your skull because I'd ultimately been split from just over my eyebrow on my forehead, all the way to the top back of my head.
Okay. I hope nobody's eating right now. My stomach just did a flip flop. Okay. I'm a visual person. I'm like visualizing this might make. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Don't get too graphic.
Understood. Well, we've gotten through the worst part of it.
Okay,
So,
good.
at that point, I realized, okay, this is bad, meaning that I couldn't get my jacket off and that I needed his help. So I relented and I agreed to let Steve take me to the hospital. And so he put me into his pickup truck and drove me to Summit Medical Center, which is in Frisco, Colorado. Think of this as a very, very small hospital, not anywhere close to a trauma center. And so my injuries were well beyond their capacities.
Hmm.
So they were going to flight for life me down to a major trauma center in Denver. And as it was explained to me, the weather had moved in and that was not going to be possible. So they rushed me to St. Anthony's Hospital in Denver her via an ambulance. And that night, sometime between the night of November 7th and the very early morning night hours of
Okay.
November 8th, I underwent emergency brain surgery because all of the trauma that had occurred from me falling in this slide had occurred entirely to my head.
Mm.
And so what that meant was that my skull was fractured in three places and my jaw was broken on both sides. And then I had that large laceration that we had just talked about. So all of that created trauma to my actual brain, swelling of the brain, bleeding of the brain. And so the surgery was to mechanically remove all of that pressure and literally drain my head from the blood that was filling up inside of it.
Okay. All right. All right. Trying to take all that in. Sorry, y'all. Your deep pause, like, oh boy. Okay, so I had read that you said you hated God at this point, not because of that, right? But before
Yeah.
that. And so he wasn't in your thinking like a part of this. But then I'm assuming it didn't take long. I did read that. It didn't take long to recover. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so it was 3 days in intensive care and a total of 6 days in the hospital. They reconstructed my jaw. My jaw was wired shut for 17 days. But at the 3 week mark, I was back to college and back in the workforce. I was paying my way through all of that. So I really needed to get back to, earning a paycheck. But I was also well enough to be able to do that. And with such a quick recovery time in the grand scheme of things, and the fact that I was so immature and had no relationship with God, no relationship with God through Jesus Christ, that I had no maturity in the spiritual sense either. Because as we just talked about, I legitimately hated God at this point in my life. I was actively rebelling against him. I had no interest in him, period. And yet, that Christian upbringing that I talked about certainly kept me aware of him. And so I gave God this intellectual credit for the fact that I was still alive because I knew that I would have been dead in that parking lot if Steve had not arrived. Because as Steve told me, he explained in subsequent conversations that he had arrived 30 seconds before I walked across the footbridge and saw him.
And he was going to go hiking.
No, he in fact had no business being there. He had recently gotten his Toyota pickup truck and was driving into the mountains on his day off from work as well. And he was seeking to drive in snow. And he
Ugh.
starts up this snow covered dirt road, which leads to the trailhead, and decided it was a really bad idea. And he wanted to back down, but then he thought, maybe backing down is an even worse idea. I'll keep going in hopes of finding a place that I can turn
Turn
around.
around. Wow. All
And
right.
that was
That's
three
that's
miles later,
God's prompting. 3 miles.
without
Okay.
question.
So you got
God's
through all
prompting.
that. That was a major significant event in your life. And then in 2012, so 12 years later, you're married and you have your first child. And tell us about that.
Yeah. So my ego and my pride haven't changed at all from the 19-year-old that we were just talking about. Okay. The only difference is that I'm now married. I'm working corporate jobs, making decent money, trying to climb the corporate ladder. And after purposefully being married without children for a number of years, my wife and I'm going to pick my language here very specifically. My wife and I decided now it's time for us to start a family. We are blessed to have gotten pregnant right away, although back then we would have never used that word, period. Okay. We've
Right,
never used the
right.
word blessed.
I didn't see it.
And everything goes swimmingly with the pregnancy. And we are 1 week away from the due date of our son. We know we're having a little guy. His name is Luke. We've long named him. We love him. We are excited to meet him. And exactly a week before his due date, which was January 4th of 2012, I come back from walking our dogs early in the morning before work and see my wife standing in the kitchen crying. And Sue, I said to her, honey, what's up? And she said, I haven't felt him move since last night. So we go to the hospital that we were scheduled to deliver at, straight to labor and delivery. They put us into this room, bring in an ultrasound tech and an ultrasound machine. She begins to do her workup, can't find the heartbeat. Another ultrasound machine, another ultrasound tech, same thing, can't find the heartbeat. And then they bring in the MD at that point to do his workup and tell us exactly what at that point we all saw coming, which was, quote, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your baby no longer has a heartbeat," end quote. So we are literally 1 week away from the due date. We're 39 weeks gestationally. And now my wife has our firstborn dead in her belly.
Mm,
We are completely overwhelmed by the grief,
of
just
course.
crushed and devastated.
Of course.
And up to this point, there is no relationship with God. There is still all of the I want nothing to do with him, up to and including in the months and handful of years prior to that. My wife had even suggested we should go to church, and I told her, no, we don't need to. You're good. I'm good. He's good. We're good. We don't need that. So, in the midst of all of this grief and, devastation, my wife says that she needs to go to the bathroom. So I said, I'll go with you. I'll help you get to that room because, of course, she's very pregnant at this point. We walk the handful of steps down the hallway. I help her into the giant bathroom, with the single toilet in it, close the door, and I'm in the hallway and she's in the bathroom. And I'm overwhelmed by the physical weight of the emotion of the grief. And that puts me on my knees. Now, I'm describing it that way because I'm not on my knees in a spiritual position, okay? At
Okay.
least not intentionally. I'm just truly crushed by the weight of the grief. And up to this point in my life, Sue, as a 31-year-old man, every challenge that I had come against, okay, with some grit, some tenacity, a little bit of money, a little bit of DIY, a little bit of video, help from somebody, a little bit of something, I have been able to, at least in my perception, overcome all of those challenges. And in this moment, on my knees, overwhelmed by the grief and the devastation, I realized this is beyond me. I couldn't fix a dead baby. And at that point, I cried out to the God that I knew about and said, I need you. I can't do this.
Mm,
And it was at that moment of surrender that God literally met me
mm,
and he was there.
mm,
And I entered into relationship with Jesus Christ and gave my life to him because I needed to. I needed him.
mm. Tell us about
And
what that means. He was there.
yeah, um, I think the best way to answer that would be that we could just sense that he was with us
Mm,
when we prayed.
mm,
And we go back into that room after my wife comes out of the bathroom. And I said to her, I'm like, we're going to pray. And she says to me, for what?
mm.
And that's a totally reasonable response because up to this point,
Yeah,
there's no
you've
God in
already
our lives.
and you've already
None.
lost the
You know what I
baby,
mean?
so what is there to pray for? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I said, because it's all we've got. And so over the subsequent months of us dumping our heart out to him in prayer in the most raw way that we could, the anger, the grief, the heartache, the devastation, he handled all of it. And he comforted us through all of it. And we're talking 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, like middle of the night, pitch black, holding hands. You're awakened by grief. You know what I mean? You've been asleep. You're awakened by grief, just crying out to him. And we were then baptized. This is again all in January of 2012. And we were baptized that fall. And he has been changing our lives
Mm,
for the last 14 years. And it's been incredible.
that's really cool. And then I had read how not long after that, you had uh, a little girl come, right? Well, it was
Yeah.
7 years. 7 years later. Wow.
Mm.
So,
Well, no, our daughter was born 18 months later.
oh, 18 months.
And
Okay.
yeah, yep. And that was wonderful and amazing. And so for the longest time, we were over the moon that we had a living child. And we
Yeah.
thought for sure, this is good. This is God's will. We are super content and grateful to have a living child. But as the years went on, we always remained in this kind of this range of 70 to 90%. We're not going to have any more children. Again, just totally over the moon and filled with gratitude that we had a living child. But we began to feel individually and separately these little nudges from the Holy Spirit. We talked about it and prayed about it, and ultimately felt as if God was telling us to try for another child. And so we did. And we got pregnant right away. And it resulted in, I'm juggling because it's so incredible. It resulted in identical twin boys.
Oh, okay.
And through the midst of this, I'll just tell this story very briefly. Through the midst of this, my wife and I were trying to avoid January being the month in which we would deliver or she would deliver
Mm.
any additional children. And so we played prevent defense until the mathematics worked out to where if we got pregnant right away, which we didn't anticipate, but we thought just in case if it does, this would push a due date into February. Well, we got pregnant right away. And for 40 weeks, our due date was February. But in a high risk obstetrician practice, because we were high risk due to, Luke's fetal demise, and because we were now having
You're
multiples,
older
the
too.
due date was
Yeah.
moved up
Hmm.
to 36 weeks. And so my wife fought that tooth and nail, and the Holy Spirit told me as I was praying at one point, he said, these babies are going to be born alive. You tried to control these things, and you're not in control. So they will be born in the month of January. And then there was
Mm.
this pause. And it was a brief pause, but it was a pause. And then he said this, Sue, and you will tell this story. So 7 Januaries after Luke's death, we have two living sons,
Mm.
identical twins, 7 years to the January. So we celebrate Luke's birthday and we celebrate our living son's birthdays in January, and God gets all the glory for that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of people they don't name the child. Of course, your child was pretty close to coming out.
Hmm.
But I've heard those stories where they meet, even the famous one that way back, I was thinking about it with the little 5-year-old boy, Colton goes to heaven, right?
Mm,
Heaven is real. And then he meets his
yeah.
sister that he'd never heard about, but they hadn't named her. I don't think so. And then when he comes back, tells the parents, I think they named her and they would
Mm,
celebrate her. So it's very cool
yeah.
that you celebrate Luke's birthday and you have that name. So I'm thinking with, I suppose everybody's different, but I imagine the majority of people, it took a lot of courage to try to get pregnant again because there'd be a lot of fear that this could happen again. True.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably was
In
a hard
fact,
time.
it was very challenging because right actually out of the gates, and this was something that we didn't talk about, but my intention was to replace Luke. And we got pregnant
Mm.
right away again. And we were 10-ish weeks along with
Mm.
that baby when we miscarried.
Um,
And the loss from that miscarriage was really just rolled into Luke's grief. So
mm.
we didn't name that baby, but it was very clear at that point that we needed to stop and heal. And so there was then at that point another 7 months or so until we were pregnant again. And yeah, it was very stressful for my wife because she perceives that she is holding all of the risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just so wonderful. At one point we're at church because the church that offered to host the memorial service for Luke, okay,
Mhm.
ultimately became our home church, and we were there for 2 years until we moved from Colorado. And just absolutely incredible time of God breathing life into us through that particular church. And at one point during worship on one Sunday morning, where my wife is pregnant with our daughter, I literally heard from the Holy Spirit explain to me that she was going to be born alive. And so that gave us great confidence, knowing that he told us she's going to be born alive.
Yeah.
And she was, and there were some complications. Ultimately, all of that worked itself out. There weren't any really, major issues or anything along those lines. But yeah, it was a stressful period for her.
Yeah. Well, praise God that, you have these lovely children. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
So the time passed, and there's still one more pretty recent situation that came up. Tell us about that work situation.
Yeah. So, as mentioned earlier, right, I'm climbing the corporate ladder as a 30-year-old, and ultimately my relationship with God changes, right, because I'm now in relationship with him. And so I'm becoming a completely different person over the 14 years that I've been in relationship with him. But I'm still the sole breadwinner for our family. And I'm a successful salesperson at this point in my career. And I am moving from company A to company B, as I had been recruited by company B away from company A. And, this is at the executive levels, senior vice president types of levels. And so the job offer has always been reviewed by legal and vetted and all of these types of things.
Mhm.
And so I resign. And 4 days, I've resigned, of course, after accepting the new position. And 4 days after that, the job that I had been offered is rescinded. And it became crystal clear to my wife and I that these things do not blow up unless God is blowing them up.
Mhm.
And so we prayed about it, and we asked him for direction, and we just had this sense that we were supposed to move forward. And so I called a buddy of mine who'd had a sort of a similar situation in life occur. And I also knew that he was a strong Christian. And his sort of first remarks to me were, let's fast. Let's do a 3-day fast and seek God in this and figure out, why did he do this? What's his plan? And I'm like, great idea. Let's totally do that. I'd fasted before many times for health reasons, but never for any spiritual reasons. And so the conversation that I'm describing here with my buddy is on a Friday. We plan to fast Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the upcoming week. And as it started we started fasting Monday, fasting Tuesday, and on Wednesday morning, I'm in a block of prayer. I've been praying in the morning, praying throughout the course of the day. This is not just not eating, right? This is earnestly seeking God in prayer to understand, why did he do this? What is his will? You know what I mean? And on that Wednesday morning, he gave me 3 bullet points, Sue: sit and wait, complete surrender, full trust. And the sit and wait, I just knew it meant stop looking for work.
Mhm.
So I stopped looking for work, but I also thought that this was the equivalent of a father or a mother placing their child in the timeout chair, or being told to sit on the steps and take a timeout. Do you know what I mean? And so I thought, okay, a week from now, 3 days from now, something like that, he'll sort of let me get up out of my timeout
Yeah.
and allow me to go back to looking for work. Because, as mentioned, right, I'm the sole breadwinner. I'm not the lead breadwinner. I'm the
Right.
sole breadwinner.
Right.
You know what I
You've
mean?
got young
There's
kids.
5 mouths to feed.
Yeah.
And he made it very clear over more fasting and more prayer that I was to launch the podcast called Coincidence or God, and that I was not to look for work, and that he would provide. And that's been, as you and I sit here and record this, that's been 18 months ago. And I haven't had a paycheck in that period of time. And yet he has provided, and he gets all the glory for that. It's been wild.
So of course we're curious how the provision came.
Mm, yeah. So I think the easiest way to describe it is checks would literally show up.
Mm,
out of nowhere.
very
And
cool.
and for not small amounts.
Mm,
It's been incredible. Absolutely incredible.
very cool. I'm waiting for that day. My whole nonprofit's waiting for that day. Sometimes he does that and sometimes he doesn't, right? It's just all
Yes,
up to
indeed.
God's will.
That's right.
Yeah, whatever
Absolutely.
he wants. So I love that you're following his will. Now you have a show that I don't even know what that means called When You Look.
Mm. Yeah. Coincidence or God, actually, we've just recently retitled it from When You Look,
Oh,
but that was all at
okay.
his direction.
Okay. So what were you thinking when you named it When You Look?
Mm. Yeah. So the backstory on that is really that the purpose of the show is to bring God glory, ultimately through ordinary people sharing their extraordinary stories, these extraordinary experiences that they themselves have had. And then we let the listener decide, okay, well, was that crazy thing that Mick or Sue just talked about, that whoever the guest is, was that coincidence or was that God? And so When You Look was really born out of a conversation that my sister and I had as we were at one point planning to co-host the show. And she was very emphatic about a story, a crazy, wonderful, amazing God story that she was aware of. And I was very emphatic about one that I was aware of because we didn't know of how many that there were. And I said, God is in all of these stories. And I just sort of like trailed off. And my sister says, yeah, when you look. And I was like, yeah,
There you
that's a
go.
great title for the podcast. And so for a year and a half, that's exactly what the show was called. And recently we were praying and God directed us to change it to Coincidence or God. So we're glad to do that.
Is that more because it's more obvious what it
Well,
is?
the central question in every single episode of When You Look was
Yeah.
coincidence or God. Like we would literally the stories would be shared
Yeah.
almost like the way in which you asked it. It's like, you didn't ask it this exact way, but it was sort of like, was it coincidence that you ended up on that rock or was that an
Yeah.
angel? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so there are elements in people's stories that will pull out and highlight and then ask that question of coincidence or God. So it's literally just been baked in the whole time and ultimately is a bit more descriptive, as you were suggesting.
Yeah, that's very cool. So yeah, I hope that we're all hearing that these were not coincidences. And I love, sometimes we say, oh, I became a Christian on October, whatever, and I began a relationship with God, as if it's like the first time that God was in our life,
Mm,
and showed up. And it's like,
yeah.
well, we may not have recognized it, we may not acknowledge it, but he's been in our life before we were born, you know,
Yes.
and and it was already a plan. That he talks, I always bring this verse up more and more. I've got to have a whole conference about this. I swear it fits into my normal Beauty for Ashes conferences, but in Ephesians 2:10, that we were created, right? You're laughing, right? Tell me why you're laughing. Tell me what that is. The
Sue,
F.
that is literally my favorite verse. It
There
is
you
where
go.
I
You say it
derive
then.
my identity. And I think I was going down in my mind the exact same path that you are. So we are God's handiwork. We are his craftsmanship, right? We are created in Christ Jesus. And we're created specifically then, according to Ephesians 2:10, to do good works. And then this is the part that I love because it makes it really, really purposeful for me as I understand this verse. We're created, right, to do good works that God prepared in advance
Advance.
for
Exactly.
us to do. And so what I take from that is not only that I am his masterpiece or his handiwork, right? But also that I was created on purpose.
Hmm.
And so I love that verse. And I also love it. If I can stay here for 5 more seconds, I love that it is the bookend to verses 1 through 9, where we're told that we are saved by grace through faith, not by works. So what it does for me as that ego-driven guy that we talked about before, it
Right.
reminds me I could have never done it. Could have never done it despite my pride, right? And that the whole thing is a gift. And that I have been created on purpose by the God of the universe. And man, imbuing that, you know what I mean? Like bringing that into me has changed my life. And it's to his glory that he had that particular verse have that type of impact on me.
Yeah,
And it
that's
sounds like
awesome.
to some degree you as well.
Oh, absolutely. So you have to have me on your show, and then you'll know why.
Okay.
My
Yes.
listeners know my story, but yes. So you know, the probably the beginning biggest uh, not coincidence was that 2 years before I was born, my mom was an RN nurse at a
Hmm.
hospital in pediatrics, where the number one surgeon to help cleft palate babies, he had just come up with skin
Hmm.
grafting. It's literally the guy that was trying that out and
Wow.
figured it out, right?
Yeah.
And so they were flying in babies who had severe cleft palates from
Mm.
all over the country. And they're all on my mom's ward. And she was so
Wow.
talented at caring for them and comforting them and figuring out how to feed them and how to take care of the stitches and the wounds after that.
Right.
She ended up specializing in cleft palate babies. So 2 years later, fast forward, this is a not coincidence thing. The Lord had prepared her in advance to do the good work. I am born as the most
Yes.
severe cleft palate up to that date to live. And
Wow.
yeah, I had no nose, no upper lip, no upper palate. I actually looked that up. There's very few people like that, and it says there's only a certain number, but it's because it wasn't even recorded yet. This was in
Mm.
59. And they sent me home to die because he's like, well, I can't put you in the operating room. It's too big a hole and you'll die. Your heart is weak. We're not he's telling my mom she'll die.
Hmm.
And we can't get food into her. And so they sent me home to die at 3 weeks. But my mom, she did not. She did have faith in God,
Yeah.
and she knew he would do something. So I get home, and as soon as she walks in the door, she sees that my two older brothers had made a mess of the house, and their toys were strewn all over the table and other places. And she sees a mask of my brothers, and it gives her an idea. Again, Holy Spirit,
Hmm.
And like you, she didn't necessarily attribute all these things. And part of it is I think you're in stress mode. You know what I mean? You're having
Right.
trauma. I'm having
Absolutely.
trauma. My baby is dying, and they told me they're not going to do anything about it. And so she rigs up this crazy thing, figures out how to attach it to my head and how to attach a bottle that she'd been breast pumping, putting it in the freezer. That's how much faith she had. Like, this baby will
Mm.
not die, and I will breastfeed this child someday. And
Yeah.
so I started
Wow.
sucking, which I didn't know this till more recently. She was telling me if a baby doesn't suck, they not only don't have the upper uh, lip, but their jaw never develops properly, but
Mm.
mine could. And she takes me back at 3 months and says to the doctor, you will operate on my baby because God's going to keep her alive.
Mm.
And I have done so much to help all your surgeries to be successful. So out of guilt, I think, and friendship, he tried and he succeeded. And the
Mm.
first operation was
Praise God.
done, and there were 25 to follow over the next 15 years. And it was not an easy road. So that was like the first uh, beginnings, I guess, of the miracles.
Yeah.
And even that one doctor abortions weren't allowed at the time, but one intern, I believe, was just whispered to her it would be better if she dies before she
Mm,
comes out because they thought I might be born with no arms or legs based on the
mm,
fluid that was building in my mom before
wow.
delivery. So, that's one of many in my life that, I just this week in my prayer walk, thank God once again, as I do so often, to thank you that I'm alive.
Yeah,
I didn't have to be alive. You just chose to do that and to use me. And because of that, Mick, I have always had a heart. Being in the hospital, seeing so many tragic things, so many really
mm,
sad things. You're on a ward with a bunch of children, and your little friend you played with one night comes the next morning after surgery with no legs. Just stuff like
mm,
that.
yeah.
But I
Wow.
was determined to help people, to prove to this world that we're all worth being alive and being treated with honor and respect and love.
Absolutely.
And that's really a lot of the theme of my life now, and why I started Crown of Beauty International and travel all over the world, helping women, and now we're helping men as well, to see themselves as God sees them, exactly the Ephesians 2:10, that He created them to do good works, which He prepared in advance for them to do. And so
Amen.
I love your story. It fits into my ministry perfectly. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Maybe we'll recruit you and come over to Nepal with us. Tell your story. It'll really bless them, because a lot of the places I go, there's a high uh, death. I don't know what do you call that when the children die at birth
Mm.
or
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
There's
Death rate, I guess.
there's a name for that, but yeah. But what a blessing. So I love this. I'm going to call this Miracles Exist because we have a pretty
Man, they
large,
sure do.
not only American audience, but largely American, and we don't attribute that, but there's so many miracles that we'll never know till we get into heaven that God is doing. He's really protecting us and caring for us, and is caring for both of your children who are with him and have been raised by him. You have to give a name to your first one or your second one there.
Yeah.
So that what a blessing. Well, thank you so much, Mick. I really appreciate it. And do you have like social, and do you have any books or website or anything that we want to advertise a bit for you?
Yeah, very gracious of you to ask. So coincidenceorgod.com is our website, or you can grab Coincidence or God on YouTube or any of the places that you might listen to a podcast. So the podcast is called Coincidence or God. You can grab it anywhere, including YouTube.
All right. And when are you going to write a book? You can get a
you're
ghostwriter.
you're
There you
you're
go.
you're the
The
like half
hundredth.
you're the sixth person that's suggested that this week. So I'm waiting for God to direct that.
Okay. That is awesome. Yeah, see 2 books ago, I put out a book called Shaking Off the Shackles, and it's about Nehemiah.
Hmm,
And, part of the beginning step when the prophecy was from Isaiah 61:4 that of him that he would rebuild, restore, renew. And sure enough, the Lord accomplished that through him. But in the rebuild phase was exactly what you're going through now.
hmm,
He was called to wait, and he did,
hmm,
and he waited. He didn't wait quite as long as you, but he waited 4 months, and then God opened the
hmm,
door. But he prayed, he fasted the whole time. And then when God opened the opportunity through the king, he still was patient and waited. He went up and he checked out the land. He didn't take the whole troops, he didn't challenge everybody. He checked it out, he waited on God, and then God, okay, now's the time. So I love that you're doing that. You're listening to God and waiting. It's awesome.
It is my
Okay.
pleasure to be obedient to him.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, it's an honor, isn't it? All right. Well, y'all, I'm sure that you want to share this one with people. Don't miss out. And you know, hop on to his podcast, Coincidence or God, and so many encouraging stories. So thanks again, Mick.
Appreciate it, Sue. Thanks a bunch.
All right, everybody, have a great week, and we'll see you back here with another great guest next week.